Senator from Greenville, Senator Loftis, what purpose do you rise?
Question.
Senator Yields.
Senator Yields.
Senator, and what I'm going to ask is, I'm not trying to be cute, but you're presenting data there that says accidents and driving carelessly, whatever, recklessly is coming down with opioid use. Why then do you put in the bill that they can't be driving a car?
Not opioid use, not opioid.
Excuse me, I misspoke.
Yeah.
Cannabis.
I'm not arguing that it's a good idea to drive while under the influence of marijuana. What I'm saying is I'm objecting to the statement that was put out there that if you pass medical marijuana laws, you're going to see traffic impaired drivers being in accidents more often. What I'm saying is the evidence shows the reverse. So in other words, I'm not encouraging people to get high or take marijuana and drive a car. What I'm saying is the argument that they're advancing out there, without citing any studies, that this is going to further increase impaired driving incidents is not borne out by the 5 or 6 studies that I have here that have looked at precisely that question.
First of all, let me tell you, I appreciate you calling me to further inform me about this issue, and I do appreciate this. I know you're passionate about it. I happen to disagree with you in so many instances here, but doesn't, in many cases, the users of alcohol and marijuana users, doesn't that quite often concur at the same place? I'm speaking, you mentioned the 70s or whatever you mentioned earlier, and I thought about Woodstock and what went on there. Is it kind of in the same party theme? Would I be accurate?
I mean, certainly, you know, I'm not going to say that there aren't instances of people drinking beers or alcohol and also, you know, smoking marijuana or taking marijuana. Clearly they do. But what I'm suggesting is, and what I'm saying that these studies show, is that to a considerable degree, alcohol and marijuana are substitute goods. And that if you legalize medical cannabis and give patients access to medical cannabis, at the margins, there's going to be less alcohol, and the statistics bear that out. So, and I think, you know, when you ask your question, well, why is that the case? This whole theory of substitution of goods. I mean, but you're right, it can be complementary. There are people, plenty of people that would drink beer and get high and smoke dope too. I mean, I get that. But on the whole and in the aggregate, that substitution effect that I'm talking about not only have driver impaired instances not gone up like this email says they will, they've gone down materially. And that's based on studies done by the Department of Transportation and others that I have here. And again, I'm not going to belabor this point too much, but I want to make clear that I'm not cherry picking one study. I'm giving you 5 or 6 studies that have looked over a decade of time and compared fatality rates post and before and after MML laws, and there's a decrease. And I think, you know, I want to speak from my own experience that you tend to get a little paranoid when you're high, and you tend to, you know, slow down a little bit more when you're going to crystals or whatever. I mean, you just do. And, you know, and if you drink, I mean, the thing is that, you know, again, the studies are that you are less inhibited and that you're more aggressive. And so it stands to reason to me that if there's substitute goods in that way, that's a reason for that decline.
Well, I think, did you know one of the questions I asked you earlier in a previous conversation was the combination of cannabis or marijuana and alcohol. Someone who drinks a beer and gets in a car, and your response was, well, both are illegal, and that's true. But if you observe the beer cans on the country roads out there, you know they do it anyway. I mean, they are. They're going to drink and drive. So do we know the effect of that?
I think it'd be bad. I think if you're under the influence of alcohol and marijuana and driving a car, that's a bad idea. Again, I'm not making the argument that it's safe and people ought to get out there under the influence of marijuana and drive a car. I'm not saying that. In fact, I'm saying you should not.
I do understand that.
But what I'm saying is I'm making the point that the allegation that was put out there by the GOP that driver-impaired incidences are going to go up as a consequence of medical marijuana laws isn't borne out by the evidence. And again, we have the advantage here of looking at states that have had medical marijuana laws in place for decades. I mean, these things have been studied. I mean, we're not to guess at it. We know the results. We can see it. And not only one study, but in multiple studies, you see a decrease. And so when that's the case, when that's the truth, why are they putting out that email saying that if you pass medical marijuana laws, there's going to be more driver impairment? That's just not true. It's not true.
Could it be, Senator, that they're impaired, just not as impaired?
What's true is that the incidences of impaired driving are less in states that have medical marijuana laws. That's not an argument in favor of getting on the influence of marijuana and driving. I'm making a statement in regard to, as a matter of public policy, this is a consequence that flows, and it's 180 degrees from what's being put out there. I mean, the irony here is, you're accusing me, okay, now you got me thinking about law enforcement getting mad again. I mean, they put this out. They put this out about me.
Right.
They mailed this to my daughters who aren't even registered to vote. They wanted my daughters to get this. And now, today, the new thing that they're saying I'm in charge of, sorry, it was put out this morning. I am trying to establish, quote, an industrial marijuana complex in South Carolina. Capital I industrial, capital M marijuana, capital C complex. I don't even know what that is. What I'm trying to do is let doctors do what they think's in their patient's best interest. What is so radical about that? What's radical is that we're letting law enforcement and politicians tell doctors what's in their patient's best interest. That's what's ludicrous.
I do understand your point from that perspective. But when you talk about, when you disregard, or when we disregard the Medical Association, the SLED, the State Law Enforcement, and the Sheriff's Association, who are out there in the public dealing with people who are using opioids, who are using cannabis, who are whatever they're using out there, they're confronted with it every day. Why should we discount what they have to say? Don't they? Shouldn't we know? Should we want to know what they have to say?
I don't discount what they have to say at all. In fact, I sat down and listened to them, and I put into the bill everything that they suggested. But what they want to do, what they're saying we have to do, is put handcuffs on doctors who want to provide medical marijuana as a treatment, which we know for sure will help the patient. We know. No one disputes it anymore. They used to. When I first started this in 2015, SLED went out there and law enforcement, they all had these little red stickers that said, marijuana is not medicine, okay? They don't have those stickers anymore because there's overwhelming proof now. We've got empirical studies that show it is medicine, okay? So they shift on to something else now. Well, if you somehow allow doctors to authorize use of cannabis, not smoking, because they didn't want that, for 13 specific medical conditions where a doctor has to go through a litany of things before he or she can authorize it, that if we do that, we're going to have more traffic fatalities? Based on what? On nothing. And in fact, it's the others true. The data shows that they go down. I mean, this misinformation is just ludicrous, absolutely ludicrous.
Well, did you know, I would agree there's a lot of misinformation out there, perhaps on both sides. And,
I mean, tell me what I have said that you believe is not true, and I'll try to go ahead and rebut it.
I'm not saying you said anything other than you are speculating on some surveys and what, and I understand why you're upset if you were targeted. I would be too. I understand that. So,
but I guess I would say I'm not speculating. I'm looking at what these exhaustive studies over a decade of time, peer-reviewed, double-blind. I'm not speculating. I'm telling you what they show. And if we're going to talk about predictive, we're trying to be predictive here. We're trying to anticipate what are the consequences of this are going to be. I don't know how else to do it except to look at what the experience has been in the states that have legalized medical marijuana, because we have real-world experience with what's happened there. Has there been an increase in teen use? No. I'll get to that in a moment. There's been no increase in marijuana use by teens as a result of medical marijuana laws. I mean, that's shown in study after study as well. I mean, just these things that they're throwing out there, there's no support for it. And so that's what I'm responding to. Okay, first, I'm having a pot party and it gets sent to my daughters and whatever, that's funny, that's fine. Now I'm in charge of an industrial marijuana complex. I'm a don of some sort. I don't know.
Tell me this, if you will. And you mentioned something about corporate, I forgot what you said exactly, but we have increasing number of lobbyists out there lobbying for this issue right now. How much does it cost to set up a dispensary? Got any idea?
The capital costs of building a grow facility or a processing facility or a dispensary, I'd be speculating. I don't know. I mean, you're just thinking of square foot costs. I don't know. You got equipment, and you've got to hire, qualified personnel. I mean, you've got all sorts of monitoring. And that's another thing about this bill. One of the things that we did is I went around and looked at these 36 states that have legalized medical cannabis. And I found out which ones had the best security, which ones had the best tracking, which ones had the best real-time. So we put in here a 24/7 seed-to-sale tracking where you know where the product is at all times in real time. SLED or DHEC can go unannounced onto premises at any time. I mean, I built into this everything they wanted in terms of monitoring, in terms of security, in terms of making sure there wasn't diversion, in terms of, you can't smoke it. I mean, I gave and gave and gave and gave to the point where they won't engage with me anymore, and they'll just go ahead and throw out blatant falsehoods instead. That's how they're engaging now.
Well, I said I could apologize for somebody else's actions, but that's their actions on that. My point in asking that question, it's not going to be a small entity that's going to open up a dispensary. Is that correct? Well, you would think that would be correct. Because
in the bill, there's a limited universe of growers, processors, and dispensers, and it's that way for an important reason. We're starting something new, and I didn't want there to be, like some states just have it wide open, and any number of people can be growers or processors or dispensers. This bill constricts that universe because I want DHEC and SLED to be able to monitor that behavior. I want them to become familiar, and I don't want to overwhelm them with a number of participants out there with something that's brand new.
That is not limited in the bill, right?
It is in the bill, limited in the bill.
How many?
Let me pull that up.
I missed that somehow.
Yeah, it's. I'll give you the section, Senator. Just give me a moment. Okay, it's section 44-53-2390, and they're limited as follows. 15 cultivation center licenses, that's the growers, 30 processing facility licenses, 4 transporter licenses, and I haven't talked about that yet, but that's how you get product from a grow to a processor to a dispenser. And then 1 dispensary for every 20 pharmacies in the state, and 5 independent testing laboratory licenses. So those are the universe of applicants. And then the bill sets forth the criteria that they have to submit to DHEC. What experience do they have in the area? How well capitalized are they? What's your business plan look like? And then DHEC is to conduct a review of those applications and to award those limited number of licenses to those applicants that best meet the criteria that we have set forth in the bill.
As far as the experience in here, do you anticipate most of that coming from out of state, or do we have that experience already in South Carolina?
There is in the bill currently a weighting factor that's given if you're from South Carolina, quite frankly, that's something that I thought that maybe on the floor we might want to strengthen that some more to give more of a preference to South Carolinians. That's not going to stop people from coming here, becoming residents and submitting, but maybe if we had more stringent language in regard to how long you've been here, the percentage of individuals that you employ that have been from here. I take your point. I mean, on the one hand, the overriding objective of this bill is to get medicine in the hands of people who need it, but a secondary consideration or another consideration is the economic well-being of South Carolinians as opposed to somebody from out of state. So I understand that issue, and I'm willing to work on that.
One of the things that I have read here, and you get a lot of information, and I try to vet it, I try to verify the source, et cetera, say that in other states where medical marijuana has come into play, the next step is open use of it. What is your response to that? Do you agree with that or disagree? Or disagree?
I think it depends on your state. And generally, a state is going to reflect, or its policies are going to reflect, what their citizens want, which is why you have 36 different types of medical cannabis laws with different emphasis on things. So while in California there was a progression from medical cannabis to a point now where you can just go out there and grow your own, we're in South Carolina, and it's like anything else. I mean, if you don't have the support of the people of South Carolina, it's not going to happen in these chambers. And so I guess that would be my response, is that every legislature is going to be reflective of what their citizens want. South Carolinians don't want to be like California or Colorado. I think they want this. I mean, I think. Now, there are some that would say this goes way, way too far and you're overboard. You're making them jump through all these hoops. But I think that's where South Carolinians are. They want to take a baby step here. They want to go ahead and take a look and see, how does this work? And build in all these safeguards. And maybe over time, it'll turn out that we don't need to have a lot of these safeguards that I'll go through, and I'm going to talk about them. But for right now, I'm comfortable with what I'm presenting to this body, because I think it's reflective of what South Carolinians want.
Did you know I would agree with you that South Carolinians, I think, do want to take baby steps into it. Mm-hmm. But going back to what I said about the investment here, it's not going away, even if we say these baby steps aren't where we want to go. I mean, I understand your passion for this.
Let me make this point, too. I mean, it almost seems at times that I'm talking about introducing marijuana into South Carolina for the first time. Like this is the Garden of Eden, and somehow I'm introducing evil. Marijuana is everywhere, and it's being smoked right now. And it's not regulated. You don't know if there's adulterants in it. Some people are dying because it's laced with things that's very dangerous. What this bill does, in a strictly medical context, requires it to be tested, requires it to be labeled, requires it to have a physician's approval. I mean, it regulates something that right now, I'm telling you, people who get relief from it are doing it now anyway. Most of them are. Margaret Richardson is. I mean, if the alternative to lying awake, waking up screaming in pain with your face feel like there's a Bunsen burner on it, and puffing on something that makes it go away like that, that's not a hard call to make. It's not.
Let me ask you this. You listed a number of things that cannabis can be used for in treatment, correct?
13.
You've mentioned...
Which is much less than any other state, because I wanted to keep it to those for which I could say, yes, here is empirical medical research and science that says it can help, okay? I kept it tight.
You mentioned fibromyalgia, right?
That's a neurological disorder.
You familiar with lupus?
I know what it is.
And systemic lupus? Do you know that it has quite often, systemic lupus has, it mimics a lot of things, rheumatoid arthritis, fibromyalgia, pain, and so forth. Would that be a viable treatment? Would cannabis be a viable treatment for this?
I think it depends on, again, a physician sitting down with that patient, reviewing the medical history, seeing whether or not other medications have helped, counseling them. I can't, I can't put myself in that place, I guess, is between that physician and that patient. And so I don't know in specific examples you're giving me, I can't say whether it would be efficacious for a patient or not. I think that's up to that patient physician to decide. And that's what this is all about, really, from a philosophical level. I've not talked about the philosophy of this, but I've always kind of subscribed to the notion that my freedom to swing my arm ends where your nose begins, okay? So that if I do something that affects only myself, then government ought not interfere with me. But if I do something that impacts you, that's a legitimate condition precedent for government to have coercive force against me. All we're talking about here is freeing up a patient in consultation with a physician to do what that patient thinks is in their best interest for one of very tightly defined conditions. And to me, I don't understand, particularly my party, Republican Party, that's supposed to be for individual liberty. Okay, that's supposed to be for the sanctity of the physician-patient relationship. I heard that all the time during the COVID debate and the therapeutics. Why they're making this issue something that defines them. And why are they suggesting, I mean, can I put up that slide about the funding for SLED, our law enforcement? Why are they sending out an email saying, if you don't oppose this bill, you're siding with those who want to defund the police? Why are they making that argument? Look, I mean, Senator Martin, this is not going to be a surprise to you. Does that look like a state that doesn't respect law enforcement? Does that look like a state that wants to defund police? We don't. I respect them entirely. They put their lives in harm's way. I do. They're wrong about this. They don't have any special expertise about what's in a patient's best interest.
Are they wrong about if they determine someone is driving erratically, they smell no alcohol, and even if the person's got a card?
No, that's their job. Look, if you have a card,
how do they determine to what degree of intoxication they are?
Okay,
because that was mentioned.
And that's a good point. In regard to alcohol, you can do the blood alcohol content. In regard to cannabis, because of THC staying in your body for longer, and they don't have tests that allow you to measure it that way. In those instances, there's going to be an emphasis on field sobriety tests, where you go through the various protocols. Be very honest with you, they're working on trying to figure out a way to objectively measure THC content in a body like you can with blood alcohol. They don't have that right now, and so they are subject to the same driving under the influence standards. You make a fair point when you talk about there isn't the equivalent of a breathalyzer or a BAC test.
Is a field sobriety test sufficient for charges? I mean, would that stand up?
I would defer to people who handle DUI cases, but it's my understanding that that a lot of people refuse to take a breathalyzer, and that when they are prosecuted for DUIs, the prosecution does rely upon those roadside tests. Again, I'm not a DUI lawyer, but so yeah, you can prosecute somebody based on that. I mean, I think that's one of the first things lawyers counsel drivers to do is don't take the breathalyzer, right? But a lot of them still go to jail anyway.
I thank you for your work on this. I know you've spent a lot of time on it. I know you're passionate about it, but would you agree that for every action there's an opposite and equal reaction?
The reason for the debate on this floor is not only to hear from me, but to also hear from others, and to hear how others could maybe improve the bill. I'm working, at your request, I'm working on comprehensive pharmacy language to maybe put that dispensing power more in the hands of pharmacists. I mean, you sparked my interest.
That would make me very happy.
You sparked my interest in that, and I dug into that this weekend and found out about those states that do have pharmacists and got that language, and I want to try to figure out if there's a way we can make that work here. And that the senator from Charleston, Senator Canson, said the same thing. And I feel that way too. I want that skill set there. I want that knowledge there because that's where the rubber hits the road here. Because what you're going to see with a patient who's accessing cannabis, once that patient gets a written authorization from a physician, and the physician's gone through all that due diligence and said, you've got one of these conditions, traditional medicines don't work, cannabis could be beneficial, it's still going to be up to that dispenser and that patient to figure out what cannabis product interacts with your body in a way that provides the relief. And for some, it's going to differ for everybody because, again, the way cannabis works, your body is an endocannabinoidal system. I mean, you've got cannabinoids throughout your body. And a lot of times these symptoms, whether it's neurological disorders or any number of things, is because that balance is out of whack or there's something wrong with your endocannabinoidal system. Cannabis can interact with your body to redress that, but sometimes it's going to be through trial and error. You might have a higher ratio of THC and lower to CBD. That might not work. You might have to adjust it around to see what fits. And I think especially because there's that degree of give and take at that level, integrating the pharmacist into that process, I think is extremely good public policy. And
so that brings up another question. Who makes that determination? Is it going to be the doctor who prescribed or recommended, whatever language you want to use there, or is it going to be that pharmacist or someone in the dispensary?
Well, I think both, because one of the things the bill requires is that after the authorization is given by the physician, there is a required follow-up meeting with the physician. So there's an opportunity, I think, to then for the patient to share with the physician, okay, these are the ratios I tried, this is what worked, what didn't work. But in a large number of the cases, to your point, it's going to occur in that dispensary, which puts a premium on the knowledge and experience and expertise of that person dispensing. Now, that's a fair point. And I'm trying to figure out a way to get us there. And because you've said that to me, Senator Campson has said that to me. And look, this is all about getting 45 people to look at this thing and to try to figure out a safe way to help people like Margaret Richardson. That's all I want to do, is put something legal and safe in their hands if a doctor thinks they need it.
And one of the things, did you know, we haven't discussed very much. Now, there's in the bill, I know, about operating machinery and the employer's liability or lack of liability in some cases there. And that's what I meant by other consequences. Yes, it may help some people, and that's true. I understand the passion there and empathize with that. But we also need to look at the other consequences that are out there.
And in some cases, Senator from Greenville, and it's the point that's made in this book, is that some individuals are prone or suspect to schizophrenia, and marijuana can exacerbate that. Okay, and look, because I'm not up here saying marijuana is a panacea and it's going to solve every problem, okay, because it's not. And I'm not even going to say that you have to be careful about giving it to some people who have shown dispositions toward that kind of behavior, because that's a bad idea. Mm-hmm. But what I am saying is that's not a sufficient reason for denying it to the numbers of people that will benefit from it. I mean, what you can do, and what I've tried to do in this bill, is through that written certification by a physician, they ask these questions. They consider this. Is there a history of psychiatric problems and mental instability? And in those cases, marijuana is not going to be therapeutic. But the fallacy in that argument is, because that's true of 1% or so of people, you got to deny it to everybody else. If we applied that same test to every other medication, we'd have no medications, because there's always going to be somebody that has a negative reaction. And I guess that's my point there, is that I don't deny the fact that a physician needs to be involved. I don't deny the fact that it's not going to be for everybody. In fact, I'm going to say some are going to have a disposition where it's absolutely a horrible idea. But that's what this whole relationship between a physician and a patient is about, for that physician to guide that. And this is, unlike most every other law, very, very physician-centric. It begins with that physician, and not just with an office visit, he cuts you a script. He's got to go through, or she's got to go through, a long list of things outlining, what sort of conditions need to be met before that can be authorized. It's very, very conservative. And quite frankly, it may be that, it's so conservative that a lot of physicians may not want to do it, because they may feel like, this is a lot of work. But I think that there are enough physicians out there that do want to help patients, and enough physicians that will carve out a niche in these areas to help patients in that regard, that they will be willing to fill out those things. But it's very tight. It's very restricted.
Well, did you know, now that you mentioned that, I thought about some of my physicians that I've gone to. They were even reluctant to recommend certain vitamins. So why would they, endeavor and to go this?
One of the things that I found in looking into this is, among physicians, there is a greater willingness to kind of embrace cannabis as a medicinal approach among younger physicians. Because older physicians, when they went to medical school, cannabis was not included as part of their curriculum. You do now have in medical schools, and MUSC is a leader in this regard. I participated in 3 symposiums that MUSC has held about cannabis as medicine. Very, very good. So the generation of doctors that are coming up are being taught about this. But a large number of physicians, they've never thought about marijuana in a medical context. And so another one of the things that this bill does, and another reason why it's one of the more tightly regulated ones, is that if you want to be a physician that authorizes the use of cannabis as medicine, you got to take a continuing medical education course on cannabis and understand it. So there's got to be that educational framework. I mean, they can't just go ahead and start passing out authorizations. They got to go through that course.
Enlighten me, because I touched on that when I read through the bill. How much re-education do they have to have? Does it specify?
I have.
I know it mentioned it.
It does. I want to say it's annually, it's 3 hours annually of continuing medical education. I think is 3 hours.
And that is for the pharmacist and a recommending physician, or what?
Yeah, this is in regard to the recommending physician, but also in the bill, it requires dispensers to have pharmacists, nurse practitioners, or physician's assistants employed there. They also have to take those courses as well. And again, that was a suggestion and a recommendation by the South Carolina Medical Association. I sat down across the table from them and went through a lot of these things and put a lot of these things in there because they requested. I can't think of one thing that they asked me to put in this bill that I didn't put in there.
I will give you that, Senator. You have. Yeah, anyway. You have been very open in that area.
And I was going to make another point. Is there another? I'm sorry. Go ahead, sir. I continue to yield.
No, that's fine.
Okay.
I think you've answered many of my questions.
I've got